Something in the Wash, the story that will appear in New Southerner. I knowed that was Preacher's boy as soon as I laid eyes on him. He looked just like Preacher around the eyes and the mouth. He had them same sleepy eyes Preacher got and the same droopy mouth that made Preacher look like somebody done took his bottom lip and give it a good tug. Preacher's near about 52 and I'm a few years older than him, but you think he was a young man the way he carries on over the women. The dew was still wet on the ground when she and that boy showed up. Preacher hadn't long finished eating his breakfast and had left for the cotton fields when I heard the dogs barking outside. "Y'all mutts hush up," I yelled out to them, but they kept on barking, so finally I couldn't take the commotion no more and I went to the door and there that young girl and her little boy stood. Me and Preacher as sharecroppers, living on the land we used to be slaves on. We'd run up north and lived there till freedom came. Seems like the land called us on back home, so we took what little bit of money we had and came back to Parsons, Georgia. We didn't have no hope that Preacher's mama, Ma Punk, and my mama, Patience, were still alive, but it still hurt to come back and have to see them both buried out there in the Niagara burial ground. We talked about going back north, but we was old and figured we might as well just stay on here where we was and work the land. Preacher was like a lost spirit when us first run off when we was young'uns. He'd seen too much. We all had, but slavery seemed to wear him down more than most. That's why we took off. But time away didn't do much to make Preacher any better. I looked at the girl and boy standing in front of me. I wanted to close my door to him, but of course, me being the righteous woman I didn't do no such thing. "Yes," I said, eyeing her and that boy. I had the door just open wide enough for me to peer out at him. I ain't all that particular about opening my door to strangers, even if they is a woman and a boy that looks just like Preacher. She was standing there holding a little red suitcase and holding the hand of the boy. He looked to be about 6 or 7. She was wearing Sunday clothes on a Monday. She had on a bright yellow dress that swept the ground, white gloves, and a little yellow hat that was perched on top of her head all cockeyed. She was that high yaller type, thin lips, long, stringy black hair, and skin so light she could have passed for white if she wanted to. The boy was more dark, but not by much. He was the same complexion as Preacher, and he was wearing his Sunday best too. She had him all dandied up in some blue knee breeches and a starched white shirt. He had a little straw hat sitting on top of his head too. You'd think it was Easter Sunday the way they was dressed. I reached up and tried to smooth down my hair. I'd taken off my headscarf cause I'd been dripping sweat and had planned on putting on a fresh, clean one. I looked down at my house dress. It was all splotched. I'd never really paid it too much mind till just then. "Hello, ma'am. My name is Pearl and this here is my boy Louis. Say hello, Louis," she said, putting her arm around his shoulder, pushing him toward the door so close that his little nose was pressed against the screen. "Hello, ma'am," he mumbled. I nodded, my head still not opening the door. I couldn't speak. Seems like my tongue was all tied up in knots. I just kept looking at him, waiting really, kind of hoping she weren't going to say what I already knowed she was going to say. She kind of shifted her weight from one foot to another. She looked like a scared child about the face. She didn't hardly look like she ought to be nobody's mama. "Ma'am, you mind if me and this boy sit on your porch for a spell? We pretty much walked all the way here from my pappy's place over near Macon. We sure is tired," she said, taking a dainty little handkerchief from her pocket and dabbing at her face. I wondered where Preacher had met her. He had taken to preaching again, so I'm thinking he probably met her at a revival meeting. My rheumatism kept me from going with him most times, but don't expect from the looks of it he would have wanted me tagging along. Somehow I found my voice. "Course you can sit. Is y'all hungry?" I could tell they were, but neither one of them said so. They just plopped down on the steps. The boy inched as close to her as he could without climbing on her lap. I didn't press them about eating because, to be honest, I sure wasn't in no mood to be cooking for my husband's woman and child. Miss Apple, what you call me? Miss Apple. That's what they call you, ain't it? She said, looking up at me all confused. When she said my name, I wanted to swing open that door and push her off my porch with what little strength I had left in my body. When she let my name flow off her lips like she knew me and all, well, I could have balled up my fist and walloped her across her mouth. I knew her knowing my name meant she and Preacher must have been closer than just a one-time thing. Somewhere between him laying down with her and getting up, the two of them had talked. That somehow made all this worse. My spirit certainly felt like it do when the preaching and the singing at church gets just right. I wanted to throw my arms in the air and shout at the top of my lungs, but I stayed quiet. I opened up the door and went out and sat in my rocker. It was mid-October and a bit cool, but I didn't feel no chill at all. I called the wind God's breath. I just sat there for a spell and let God's breath flow all over me. After a while, she spoke again. Ma'am, can he go out there and play? You know, so we can talk, she said, lowering her voice. That'd be all right, I said. And she whispered something in his ear. He nodded, then ran out to the tree swing Preacher put out in the yard for when some of the children from church would come over. Me and Preacher didn't have no children of our own. I'd carry a baby for a month or two, and then it would slide right out as if there weren't nothing inside of me for it to latch hold to. Nothing grieved me more than not being able to have some babies. I think if I'd had a baby or two, then maybe Preacher and me would have been a tad bit closer. He sure is a mannerable boy, I said to her, not being able to think of anything else to say. Thank you, ma'am. I didn't mean to come here and disrespect your house, but he and I don't have nowhere else to go. Miss Apple, he's Preacher's boy, Mr. Preacher's boy. I was just 16 when Miss Apple, I slumped down in my chair. Hearing her say the word stole my breath. She hopped up and was fanning me with her handkerchief. Ma'am, do you need some water, she asked. I don't know where things are, but I could look. I shook my head. What I needed was a good dip of snuff to pack between my bottom lip and gums. But I promised the Lord I wouldn't use no more snuff, not even to calm my nerves, so I just commenced to rocking. She kept looking at me like I'd all of a sudden took sick. Ma'am, we don't have to talk about this if you don't want to. I reckon you can figure out the story. But right now, Lewis and I don't have nowhere to go and no money to get there, she said, her light brown eyes stretching wide, batting real fast to keep the tears away. Ma'am, I'm trying to get to Chicago. I hear niggers can do good for themselves up there. I was praying you and Mr. Preacher might see fit to spare us any little bit you can help us on our journey. I looked at that gal like she was crazy. Where she think me and Preacher gonna get some money? There she come marching up to my house dressed better than a lot of white folks around Parsons, and she think we supposed to have her money that ain't even ours to give? We'd be lucky to break even. Seed for next year's crop, a little muslin so I can make some warm clothes for the winter, and some food staples we couldn't grow. Well, once we pay for them things, the money would be gone. Preacher would get a nickel here or there when he'd go out and do them revival meetings, but that wasn't often since he had to be home to work the land. I clicked my teeth together and just looked at her. But she kept on talking like I wasn't looking at her like she was out of her fool mind. I know it's awful bold of me to be marching up here in your face like this begging for money, but I didn't know where else to go. Me and my folks had a falling out. I promise if y'all help me and Lewis this one time, you won't never be bothered with us again. Then she burst into tears. Now you crying. Weren't crying when you was bedding down another woman's husband, or was you? But the little thing looked so pitiful. I don't know what to do. I didn't know what to do except what any Christian woman would do, and that was get out of my seat, put my arms around her shoulders, and pat. Maybe your folks will take you back, I said, and she boo-hooed even worse. I patted harder. Never mind that, honey, never mind. Why don't you tell me about that pretty dress you're wearing? Did you make that? Pearl dabbed at her eyes. No, ma'am. This dress used to belong to the white woman I did housework for back home. It was dingy as all get out when she gave it to me, but I washed it real good. And that suit Lewis got on, I made it with some leftover scraps from the Easter suit of the little white boy I kept, she said, smiling through her tears. I smiled back at her. One thing is for sure, no matter how upset a woman might be, you get her talking about her cooking, sewing, or cleaning, and she'll cheer right up. Ain't no need of y'all rushing, so Chicago ain't going nowhere. Come on in. You sure, ma'am, she said. I nodded. She weren't going to get no money out of us, but I could at least make sure she and that boy had some food to eat before they got on their way. Thank you, ma'am, she said, smiling, but not quite meeting my eyes. Louis, come here, son. Where you say you from? Near Macon. You ever been there? No, I said, but then I started remembering. I remembered the revival meeting preacher did near Macon around the time the boy would have been got. I was down in the bed sick, and a lady from my church had come and stayed with me. I even remember saying it was the best. I remember him saying it was the best meeting he'd preached in years. Better than when you used to preach under that chinaberry tree I teased. When we was young, preacher used to preach to all us slaves underneath this chinaberry tree that set off near the fields where we picked cotton. After freedom come, I heard some Negroes went out there and cut that tree down. Don't talk about them days. Them days is gone, he'd said, and gone off in a huff. He didn't like talking about slavery times, not even about his mama. Your folks' house where he stayed, I asked. She looked at me and nodded. I reached over and patted her shoulders. Wasn't no use in me being mad at her. She was just a child. Could be me and preacher's grandchild or great-grandchild even. I looked at her and wondered how preacher could have come to that, laying with a child. Get that, Louis, and let's go inside and get you two fed. I know y'all hungry. Tell me again how y'all got this far. Walked some, rode in the back of wagons the rest of the time. Couple of nights we slept in a few barns. We cleaned up this morning at a creek down the road from here. I nodded. Well, come on in. She called that boy Louis, and he came running. They both followed me inside. Mine and preacher's cabin weren't much, but we'd done a lot to make it feel like home. I fixed them both a plate, and they ate like they hadn't eaten in days. I just watched them for a spell. I was wondering why I wasn't more angry. Oh, I was plenty angry at preacher. But this little child and her son were growing on me. She and I talked and talked, not about nothing serious, just woman stuff. We talked about clothes we'd sew and foods we liked to cook, and then we talked about washing. Before I left the plantation, Ma Plump taught me how to make lye soap, and since then, that's all I ever let touch our clothes. I mixed up some lye, some hog grease, and water. Then I heated up in my cast iron pot. I wash all my clothes by hand with water from the creek. People all over Parsons know how good I do with washing clothes. I take in wash from Miss Dorothy Parsons. She married to Mr. Jackson Parsons, whose daddy, Little Jack Parsons, weren't nothing but a boy when me and preacher run off before slavery ended. But my rheumatism's making it harder and harder for me to take in wash. I asked Pearl how she likes to wash. I like to wash with lye soap like you, but I also like to put a little rose water in my wash. I make it myself. It makes the clothes smell so good. It don't stain your clothes. Oh, no, ma'am, she said, shaking her head, causing that hair of hers to float across her shoulders. Only way you know it's in your clothes is by the smell. I make another kind of smell-good water with eucalyptus. I sometimes sprinkle a little of that on my sheets and pillowcases. It helps you to sleep better. She reached into her purse and handed me 2 little bottles that looked like plain water. I opened one of them and could smell the scent of roses. It smelled better than the smell-good stuff you could buy to dab on your neck. That's my gift for you, Miss Apple, she said, smiling and then ducking her head. Thank you, honey, I said. I put the little bottles of smell-good stuff in my apron. I knew I should be hurrying her and that boy on. I should be telling them to get out of my house and leave me to some peace. But if the truth be told, I was enjoying her company, and the boy weren't no trouble at all. He just sat out the way and played quiet to himself. She smiled. You're welcome, Miss Apple. Thank you for your kindness. I wasn't expecting you to be so nice. I shrugged my shoulders. Ain't no use me being mean to you and that boy. Preacher the one who should have known better. You was just a child. Still is next to him and me. A look went across her face like she'd seen a haint or something. He's going to be mad about Louis and me being here. I reached over across the table and patted her hand, shocked at what came out of my mouth next. Don't you worry none about preacher. I'll take care of him. Then I thought, how was I going to take care of preacher? He and me was more like strangers. Too much had happened in Preacher's life that made him bitter and hard, especially towards me. He still preached on God's love, but you could tell by looking at him that he didn't have none of that love inside of him. I looked out the window, paying attention to where the sun was. Time I get a pot of stew going, and this wash ain't gonna wash itself. May I help, she asked. I looked at her real hard. You talk with good manners. You should have been a teacher. I'm sorry you got mixed up with Preacher. He always has been able to charm the birds out of the trees. I got up and started collecting the dishes so I could wash them. They must be hurt, your mom and daddy, I mean. What with you and this boy taking off? Why did y'all up and leave like that? She bowed her head and wiped away the tears. They were real hurt when this happened. I never would tell them who the daddy was. That caused tension. But then it got worse because they weren't kind to Louis. My pappy would beat Louis for no reason at all. Just beat on Louis because he was got in the wrong way. I didn't want Louis getting hurt no more, so we left. I shook my head. Seemed like they could have looked at the boy and known he was Preacher's, but I guess folks see what they want to see. And I can't see nobody being unkind to that boy, but never mind all that, because I could see she was about to have a full-on crying fit. If you want to help me, you better slip on that apron I keep hanging on that coat hook over in the corner. Yes, ma'am, she said, and quickly got up. We cleaned up the breakfast dishes, and while I got the stew cooking, Pearl started in on the wash. She tended to my wash like she was washing a newborn baby. I saw her reach into the water and gently wash the delicate clothes. I almost sighed. I ain't never seen nobody enjoy washing like that or take such good care of except for me. If it weren't for Preacher and his doings, I could almost see me and Pearl growing close. I don't have what you call friends. I pretty much stay to myself. I have speaking friends, but no close friends. After Pearl finished washing my things, she turned her attention to Preacher's good white shirt. Yesterday, before church, he cut himself shaving and dribbled blood on his shirt. I probably could have gotten it out if I tended to it right then, but I wasn't about to work on the Lord's Day, shirt or no shirt. This stain won't come out, Miss Apple, Pearl said after several minutes of scrubbing. I got up slowly from my chair and walked over to the sink where she was working. Sweat was pouring down her face, and even though she was wearing an apron over her dress, I could tell she had splotched it up a bit. I took the shirt from her tiny little hands. It was hard for me to believe hands that small had the power to wash. Hands that small ought to be playing a piano or writing words on a chalkboard. Her hands weren't nothing like mine. My hands were rough from years of field work. I wondered if Preacher had stroked her hands and said soft words to her when they laid together. I couldn't remember the last time he touched my hands. I tried to soften them a bit by putting salve on them, but they never got soft. Let it be for a spell, I said, pushing the shirt deeper into the soapy water. If it's gonna come out, it'll come out in the wash. Why don't you and that boy go and rest in me and Preacher's room? I know y'all tired. I'm gonna wait on Preacher on the porch. He'll be home for lunch soon. She looked at me for a moment and then gave me a tight hug. We stood there, just hugging, the smell of rose water and sweat filling the air. She looked tired but not so scared. She left the room and soon I heard her and Louis heading towards the back of the house. I looked into the water at Preacher's shirt. The water had become slightly pink, but the stain was still there. I pulled the shirt out of the water and walked out to the porch with it dripping water the whole way. The dogs started barking again, and this time I knew they were letting me know they had heard Preacher. I didn't look their way. I just sat down hard in my rocker with that shirt on my lap and waited for Preacher to come home.